we go. All right. Good evening, good evening. Good evening, good evening. Good evening, good evening. Hello, hello.
How are you doing?
It's going well. All right. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Just sending out. Very cool. All right. Awesome. So we're going to get started. Let me go ahead and pull up our slides for the evening. Really quick, this in the mornings, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do a morning flow where we just start the day 15 minutes of movement, 15 minutes of meditation, 15 minutes of journaling, and 15 minutes of planning our day. It's a great way to get started. There's replays on YouTube as well as in our free community. And then Monday through Friday, we have holistic education. This is our last one for the week. All this week, we have been learning about the primitive mind and all aspects of the primitive mind. Remember, the primitive mind has connection between love or fear, and fear has four expressions to it: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so we've done all of the other ones. Tonight is the last one where we're going to be working on fawn. I'm going to take some water really quick. All right. All right. So we're going to be unpacking the fawn response. And so, what is the fawn response? It's a reaction to fear, right? So, remember, we talked about the two connections that we have: love versus fear. And those are just our two primitive motivations. There's really nothing that we can do about them. They're unconscious, right? They're instinctual. In fact, they're actually not even well, they are unconscious, but they're very much instinctual. So we really have very little control over them, so to speak. They kind of have a mind of their own in a sense, unless we do the work. And what I like to do is biofeedback. Bio meaning body, feedback meaning getting feedback, right? And so you're using your body as a tool, and you're beginning to learn how to utilize your body in a healthier way based off of signaling, right? So if we begin to learn how our body gives signal, then we can have more power over it, and we can ultimately optimize. So the one thing with the fawn response is it's directly tied to people, right? So this is the one that truly is driven by a survival mechanism based off of someone external. And it really impacts, or it really it has stemmed from more deep self-worth, self-identity, those types of core wounds, right? And so what happens is that that person's almost their self-worth, their self-identity kind of collapses, so to speak, and then they have kind of given rise to all other strategies have worked at this point. We fight, flight, freeze, and now kind of we're in this, it's not always in that regard, but when we're talking about kind of the different aspects and the different paradigms and the different consciousnesses that we have, we really want to look at the depth and the detail of it. So let's talk about what we've learned so far. We've learned, again, the primitive mind driven by love or fear. Those previous responses, fight, reacting with aggression, flight, where we're escaping or avoiding or even procrastinating. And remember I said that the fight response can also be depression when we turn it inward. And then the freeze response is feeling stuck or immobilized, like that feeling of overwhelm or dread, like you can't do anything. And so each response, though, is directly tied to your survival mechanism based off of, your primitive mind. So today we're going to talk about that fawn response, though. And a fawn response is that reaction to where a person prioritizes appeasing others, right? So let's say if I am concerned or I have really a classical conditioning, because it's really about conditioning. I've been conditioned to believe that based off of your reactions from me, right, that you're going to explode or you're going to react or there's something that's going to happen, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to avoid that because for whatever reason that's detrimental to me. And it doesn't really matter the story per se, it's more so how the mind perceives it, right? And so how this survival mechanism perceives it. And so you're really, again, deep self-abandonment. You really don't think that you're good enough, that you're worthy, and so you collapse yourself. However, we have adapted very much in our culture to do this, right? To avoid conflict, to not speak up, to definitely not speak truth to power, forget that, in order to gain approval or be accepted by the masses, right? And so, because what happens when people stand up, they get vilified. So this fawn response really kind of takes hold in the consciousness, and it can show up in subtle and not so subtle ways, right? But it's often linked to these past experiences of needing, again, to keep others happy or really safety. That's a huge concern because, again, the nervous system is responding. So something really subtle, right, that you can kind of reflect on, because again, we really want to reflect and take these in. Self-awareness is almost the first step in emotional intelligence. It's beginning to look inward. We oftentimes get triggered and our nervous system reacts pretty much. We have very dysregulated nervous systems in so many different ways, right? And so until we learn to train our nervous systems and until we learn to calm our nervous system, we won't really be able to really understand a lot of what makes us us, right? And so, because that's a deep, again, introspection. So when we've gotten into this pattern of people pleasing and self-abandoning, we almost lose ourselves, right? In a lot of cases, you do lose yourself because it's all about making sure that the other person is happy, the other person is not, going to harm or do anything that is going to jeopardize your safety, right? And so this can be very detrimental. Now, if children experience this, then it really takes hold into relationships and various different, even professional situations and scenarios, public speaking, failure to launch, you kind of get the idea. So think about the last time that you said yes, right? That you really didn't want to. I worked with a healer many, 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 many years ago, and she would say, make sure your yeses are your yeses and your nos are your nos. And that absolutely stuck with me. It was a very challenging year of work with her, but that was one thing that challenging in the sense that there was so much self-introspection and self-awareness. And we really want to encourage that, especially as we go through these slides. Next week, we are going to be talking about the subconscious mind and digging deep into that, so definitely pay attention to that. And so, as you know, the slides are all over the place, so we'll organize it really quick. Let's see. I tried a couple times to get it to work today, but it was being a little interesting. Let's see. All right. Not the takeaways. All right. We're going to be in how it manifests. All right, here we go. So we're talking about how the body actually responds. And so when we're looking for signs and symptoms, if we have a fawn response, we see our difficulty saying no, right? Or over apologizing. I saw this a lot in my practice. It was really interesting because a lot of times those patients would be just in so much exhaustion, right? And almost delirious in a lot of ways. And it was always so sad because, you know, you want to tell them to stop apologizing, but in the same instance, you know that there's really nothing that they can do about it. It's an automatic response. So trying to hold space and have grace and really try to be a safe space even if you encounter somebody that has these types of responses, because it's really, hey Mariah, it's really very unconscious. And so we can't, people can't really help it in a lot of ways until they work on regulating that nervous system, soothing that nervous system, calming that nervous system, right? And so again, this fawn response goes into suppressing your own needs and desires to keep people either happy or keep yourself safe. That's another dynamic too. But it can really happen in kind of more dramatic ways, like in an instant trauma response or continual trauma responses, or also it can be done in very subtle ways too. Think about when your parents are mad, but you're in maybe a public place and they can't say anything, but you can feel that they're mad, right? And so that, believe it or not, is a training mechanism. It's a conditioning tool, right? So again, we're easily conditioned. We know, okay, if this happens, then this is going to happen, right? And so that's how as well people can become easily manipulated. So we also want to recognize what behaviors that you notice in yourself when you're trying to keep the peace, right? Even if it doesn't feel good. So here's that inner conflict that we have, right? Something will happen, somebody will say something, just, people, places, situations, and circumstances. Like I said, it doesn't really matter what the evidence is, right? But something triggers that reaction within us. And we feel that. And then we go, oh my gosh, what do I do? And so in this choice, typically people go, well, they'll feel it in their body. Like for me, I'll feel it in my chest, right? I'll go, oh, okay, how am I going to navigate this, right? So in an unhealed person, they're going to immediately go, oh my gosh, how can I make this person happy? How can I fix this? They're not going to go into the, okay, that didn't feel good, sound good. That wasn't a great experience. How can I now navigate this? That would be practicing a pause. That, hey, Bubba, that would be actually healing from that, right? And so, but when a person has that dysregulated nervous system to the response that they have chronically self-abandoned, now they have that difficulty saying no, putting boundaries up. They're always people-pleasing. They're always the one that's kind of overbearing, helping all the time. And while that may on the surface seem like a really good thing, it also can be a fawn response in terms of that sense of belonging, because it's deeply connected to your self-worth and self-esteem. And so if you've had any sort of injuries to that, you are going to fawn in subtle and not so subtle ways. Let's see. Remember, my morning flow and all my slides are always in a crazy order. Let's see. We're looking for our impact here. All right. All right, cool. So in the impact of the fawn response, right, in the short term, you get to avoid conflict. Yay, I'm not looking bad today. I'm not having to, defend anything. I'm not having to set a boundary. I'm not having to, speak truth to power, right? However, we know that in the long term, when you continue to self-abandon and you continue to give to other people, and not only it leads to burnout because nobody's filling your cup, right? Because people will treat you to the level to which you treat yourself. So if you don't have any self-worth and you don't have any self-esteem and you're just giving yourself away all of the time, right, and nobody's filling you up because you don't feel like you're worthy, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Now you're in a burnout mode, but not only that, you're angry not only at yourself, but other people, right? So it weakens that sense of self, right? Naturally, there's despair, there's depression, there's sadness, there's sorrow. It creates imbalance not only in relationship with self, but also relationship with others. So your food, we haven't gotten even into the practical physical things. That's why, it's so wild to me when people are like, change your diet with, these 3 easy steps. Yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. I quickly realized that probably within maybe the first year of me being a doctor. I was like, yeah, this isn't going to work. People are not just going to eat perfect and eat healthy. There's a lot going on with this. And so what I began to really unpack and unpeel with people is so much deep mental, emotional, psychosocial, environmental traumas that had been unaddressed, that was then expressing itself into physical form, that was expressing itself into chronic disease. And then they were being reamed through the medical system, right, and not getting any results. So by the time, most patients get to me, or find me, they are burnt out, they are exhausted, they are, you know what I'm saying? And we're not even talking about the relationships, because that was probably the beginning of all of that to begin with, right? So you never know. I have this testimonial video. I think it's on my YouTube. I don't know. If it's not, I'll have to do it. It's this woman who came to me for her thyroid condition, and pretty, standard, whatever. And come to find out, and I share her story because she was open to share it, is that, she was in a marriage with an alcoholic, right? So she's constantly tiptoeing around him, having to bail him out. She's got 2 kids. She has a career. They have a house. The whole kit and caboodle. And me having to kind of sit her down and walk her through and go, wait a second, we're not going to step over that, right? Because in conventional medicine, there is so much they don't look at. There's so much they don't ask, right? Because in a 15-minute unit, which 15 minutes is a unit that is billable by your insurance. It's not enough time, right? 15 minutes, I can barely get out patients, what water they've drank for the day or what medications that they're on, right? It's just not realistic. And so human beings are complex. They're multifaceted. They're not these little, drones or robots or boxes or whatever. So this is also part of the issue why the healthcare system is failing, because just like with Descartes and the Catholic Church, they separated the mind, the body, the spirit, all of these things, to disseminate and really separate us from ourselves. So hopefully this education will begin to help you to become more self-aware, because this Fawn response, again, I cannot stress enough, it can be subtle or not so subtle, right? If you are not angry beyond angry right now with what is going on in our political spectrum, right? There is some sort of Fawn response going on, okay? And so because the deep betrayal, right? And to be able to actually experience that and feel that. So remember, long-term effects of continuing to say yes and not wanting to say no leads to physical, emotional, mental, psychosocial, environmental, and seemingly governmental. It's a lot of things, I think. All right, so we do want to recognize this Fawn response, of course. We talked about kind of how it manifests. Let me flip to another slide, though. Let's see. All right. So how do we recognize this? First, we have to recognize self from non-self, and that can be really tricky because we give little pieces of ourself all the time, because most of us don't actually think about what we really want. Most of us just go with the flow. Most of us are just like, okay, that sounds good. All right, that sounds good. Okay, cool. We're easily manipulated, quite frankly. Look at the media. The media tells us one thing, what do we do, right? What happened with all the toilet paper again? Is that, or have we resolved that issue, right? That's what I'm saying, right? We're not thinking for ourselves, right? And why would that be? Because we're prioritizing others over our own needs. We're not sitting and thinking, do I want this? Do I want that? What do I think about this? What do I think about that? Instead, we're asking, our neighbor, our cousin, our brother, our sister, whoever, what their opinion is, and then we adopt that. Instead of free thinking, instead of, oh my God, exactly, it's so crazy. Instead of actually being rooted in self and self-evaluating and going, yeah, no, that's not going to work for me. That's not going to work for me. So we're going to self-evaluate, hey, Strawberry, and we're going to start to prioritize ourselves, especially Black women in 2025, please and thank you. Our mission is to put our feet up and relax, to take it easy, to set these boundaries. So step 2, techniques to set boundaries. We're going to practice saying no, however small that may be. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not interested in that. No, I don't really want to participate in that. We need to start saying no. So here's how we know if we need to say no. If it's affecting our nervous system, if it's affecting our sleep, if it's affecting our mood, if it's affecting our vibe, our peace, our spirit, our chill, whatever you want to call it, that thing that keeps you, from not being, in other circumstances beyond your control right now. So behind bars or padded walls, right? So we have to learn how to bring ourselves back to self, because remember, we are the creation, we are creators, right? We co-create our experiences. But if we don't know what we truly want, how are we going to create anything? We're not. It's not going to work. So really start to self-reflect. I always do this on a regular basis in terms of just really assessing what I want in my life. Honestly, it's almost like a day every other day. And the reason I do that is it's an evaluation, right? And not to throw my partner out there, but so even with my husband, I'll say, every day, right? I have an MBA, so I'll say, every day you're either a liability or you're an asset. What are you going to be today, right? And that may sound crude, right? But it's also to reclaim my sovereignty, so that I'm not in this codependent dynamic where I'm like, what was that whole thing with Tom Cruise jumping on the couch? I can't even remember what it was anymore. But this whole that you complete me business. No, that was absolutely incredibly unhealthy and toxic. We're not completing each other, right? We are two individual human beings living an experience. Now, we can coexist and co-create, but we are still two actual cells, tissues, organ systems, right? So we want to start using I statements, right? I need time for myself, the dreaded I statements, And it's so funny when people first learn psychology and stuff like that, they're really big on the I statements, right? And other people who are hip to it kind of groan, so it's kind of one of those funny things. But it's really not about outside of you, it's about you. And that thought sometimes can be so challenging for people, because their self-esteem, their self-worth, whatever, they've been through trauma, I don't know, they didn't get picked, in the the kickball line or whatever, it doesn't matter the story. That's the thing. We all crave a sense of connection and belonging. And when we're all being ripped and torn and pulled apart, and literally generations of crap is being dumped on our laps at a rapid rate, it's just it's just an interesting time to be alive. So we also want to pause before agreeing. Is this what I want? If this is what I want, is this what I want right now? Right? I've been on an energy economy probably for, a good year and a half. And my energy economy is this, I am only going to invest my energy into certain things, into certain people, into certain companies, into certain experiences, into certain, just name a thing, right? because I spent so many years, healthcare provider, helping my family, my mother, my brothers, all that, right? And so you get in compassion fatigue. You just cannot do it anymore. And sadly, don't be like me and get to the point where you're just like, you can't, like literally compassion fatigue, to the nth degree. Because when you have the responsibility of, being a teacher, being a healer, whatever you want to call it, right? And you're in a world that is so filled with suffering, right? You're heavily needed and wanted, right? But not always valued. And that's the challenge, is that we're not always given a manual when we go out, when we're launched out into the world, however we find our way out into the world, whether we crash land or not. And so it's up to us to determine, what our values are, what our self-worth is, what our identity is, what our yeses are, what our nos are. We have to sift and sort. We can't just take on what other people, right? Even our families, we can't just adopt all of theirs. We do unconsciously and subconsciously, which we'll talk about next week. And so how do you know the adult you, right, is going to think the same, feel the same, have the same? We hope not, right? We hope that every generation evolves forward. I'm really excited that my daughter is smarter than me. Probably when she was maybe like pre-teen, teen, I was like, look, you're smarter than me, you win, right? Anything I can't think of, it's a no. Because she would have oh my gosh, she would just come up with all these super creative, my brain just could not, and I'm a brilliant person. My mother's a brilliant, but that new generation, it's the new software. I'm not mad at it. I love it. I'm like, yes, this world needs that. And so we have a responsibility to let go of the old, but we have to deconstruct the old. How do we know? We have to self-examine. If we don't self-examine, we're just going to be going with the crowd. We're going to be fawning all over the place. We're all doing it on some level. We just have to decide how much and what our values and what our worth is. If we don't know our values and we don't know our worth, forget it. Forget it. We're just going to fall for anything. I mean, that's where we're at now, quite frankly, So, or at least a certain population is, we're in the boat, I guess, with or without. All right, so now let's work on, we talked about that. We'll rerun them too, because I like to recap and talk and all that fun stuff. But I do want to get to this one. Okay. So practical exercises. So we're going to start to reclaim our voice. And so what does that mean? Hold on, I'm going to take a drink. What does that mean, to reclaim your voice? That sounds like some metaphysical woo-woo stuff. So believe it or not, again, we have these spinning vortexes of energy that we can measure, by the way. We can measure, I have cameras and things like that, remote, international, so I can do it from all over. But what's really cool is we can actually measure our energy. Now, the Western medicine model doesn't believe in bioenergetic frequency, but Eastern medicine does. And that's really vital force life energy. That's how our body, mind, spirit, this whole thing runs magically and mysteriously, right? And so you can connect with that, but you have some specific vortexes of energy. So if you're not familiar with your chakras, definitely look them up. You have your three base ones. So you have your root chakra, which is your right to be in the world. You have your second chakra, which is your sacral, your right to have, right? Then you have your solar plexus, your personal power, self-love, self-worth, self-acceptance, self-appreciation. Then you have your heart chakra, so giving and receiving love, right? Then you have your throat chakra, right? Communication, right? Saying what you mean, meaning what you say. Then you have your third eye, your intuition, how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you project that, your perception, your intuition, all that. And then you have your crown, right? Which is your connection to God, consciousness, whatever. There's 72 names of God. Pick one that works for you, or pick none. Doesn't really matter to me. So there is this frequency that exists that is measurable objectively. So it's not just, it's not just fairy dust over here. And so we want to pay close attention to your second chakra, right, which is your right to have, and your throat chakra, which is your communication, because these two chakras are closely related. So if you don't feel like you have the right to have space, time, respect, pick an adjective, right? It's going to show up in your world in subtle and not so subtle ways. Why? Because the subconscious mind, which we'll talk about next week, right? It's your little filing cabinet, but it's also giving signal to your conscious mind to make decisions, okay? And so that's based off of patterns. So if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, it becomes automatic, but more so it starts to wire in the brain, right? Those neural pathways, it starts to become habitual. That's, again, classical conditioning. You start to condition the mind. That's why we're talking about biofeedback, how to work with the body, feedback, how to know what the feedback the body is giving you, and being able to either turn it down, turn it up, whatever you want to do with it. It's about optimizing body, mind, and spirit for what? Creation. All right, I digress. So, practical exercise of reclaiming your voice. First things first, you have to reflect on what you're reclaiming. What are we even talking about? And so we need to reflect. So let's choose, let's start with one, but inevitably you want to look at like three, right? Sometimes it's more difficult if you're a less focused person to narrow it down to one. I have to be extremely focused for what I do for a living. So focus is a good thing for me. However, if you're a little more scattery, right, you may want to just splatter a whole bunch of experiences that come to mind, right? There's no right or wrong to do this, right? Because reclaiming your voice is also not having any rules, right? So here's what happens when you begin to practice this, right? So in the beginning, your nervous system is going to feel almost like timid, right? So you may feel like your skin kind of feeling a little clammy or tingly or, oh my gosh, just because, again, you have wired your brain to believe that that's dangerous to say something or do something or whatever, right? So that's what your brain is telling your body, okay? And so based off of whatever classically conditioned things, right? So if I speak my truth, what's going to happen to me, right? Sometimes we don't even know, but we fill in the gap. Where does the gap come in? Where do we fill up the story? The story comes from our own imagination. We don't really know. We can strategize as best we can, but at the end of the day, nobody really knows what's going to happen tomorrow for real. So then that starts to mess with your sense of control, right? Which, remember, we know control is an extension of the ego. The only way to have control is to what? Let go of it. Who wants to let go of control? Nobody. Because that requires surrender. Who wants to surrender? Nobody. That's uncomfortable. No. Surrender. No. That's too much like powerlessness, helplessness, hopelessness. That's like giving up, right? This is all the crazy stuff that's going to go on in your mind. All the crazy shenanigans. The mind is not a good place to hang out. Just FYI. If you hadn't noticed. Not a good place, not a healthy place. Got a lot of things rolling around in it. Needs to be cleared out. Needs to be sorted through. Needs to be, that's why you've got to get your cheap therapist, your journal, right? And you have to dump that stuff out because otherwise it's going to fill up in your file cabinet and you don't want it there. What's your file cabinet? Your subconscious mind. I'm glad you're here, Tay. Sweet. So that's why we have to get into a habit. It's almost like mental hygiene. So we have to have a mental diet, right? We talked about what we really want. Well, first we have to decide what we want. So let's say if we where we are right now is not what we want. Not happening. Don't like it. That's a great place to start. Why is that a great place to start? Because it doesn't feel good. If it doesn't feel good, you're going to be more raw. You're going to be real with yourself. It's more tangible. So you'll be able to actually dump it out. You literally have to vomit on a piece of paper. I'm not joking. Like, you gotta, like, just to the point, like, you can't get it out anymore. I mean, even to the point of if you have to ugly cry, whatever. So I used to have to. So I was in like such a freeze response with my nervous system for like so long I couldn't cry, and so I had to watch really sad movies, right? And that would induce me to cry, because I could cry for the people on the eyes. I have deep empathy, so I could cry for the people on the movie and then in turn I would be crying for myself. Hey, tatted kisses. And so it would be very cathartic, and it would start to get kind of the faucet going, right? And so then it started to overflow, right? So then there's other times, right, where you can be really raw, right? And this is deeper levels of surrender, really vulnerable, right? So this story I'll tell you is, so this is after my third husband had passed away, right? So he passed away of bladder cancer, and we fought it for probably like a year and a half. It was pretty brutal. And I remember, like, it was so surreal. Like, the whole thing was like so crazy. I won't even get into all of it. It's like a what is it, Lifetime television movie, crazy. So anyway, I remember afterwards, like, everything's in slow motion. Like, if you've ever had to go through that experience, everything's in slow motion after. Like, you literally feel like you're in a movie. You're like, what is happening right now? You really shouldn't be driving. But I drove myself to the store because I had programmed myself, because I was in a real deep, again, this kind of freeze fawn response. Because one of the great lessons that I learned with working with my husband at that time was that you cannot save people from themselves, right? So the type of bladder cancer he actually had was totally treatable, but he was very stubborn, and he refused, and he would only do certain things. And he would get kicked out of doctor's offices, and I'd have to leverage my doctor relationships to get him seen. And by the time he dealt with it, it was like way too late, right? So then it became this kind of mad dash, oh my God, fear response, whatever. So after it was said and done, and he had passed away. And I'm trying to get myself back, and I literally just slept, right, forever. And then I'm thinking to myself, okay, baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. I've got to get I have a practice, I have a child, I have, either I'm going to cross over and follow him, right, for real, or I'm going to stay here, right? And these are the choices that we have to reflect on. Like, I'm going to be real, right? So we reflect, and I go, okay, so am I gonna stay here, or am I gonna go, right? So, okay, I've got more reasons to stay, so I'm not gonna stay in this bed, because this bed really, what is in this bed? Nothing. I mean, sleep, that's nice, right? So baby steps. So like every day there was like one thing, like, baby step number 1 was like shower. Baby step number 2, try to drink something. Baby step number 3. So anyway, I can't remember what baby step I was on, but the next baby step I was on was to leave the house. So I'm at the store, right? And one of our favorite stores, right? Our little local health food store at the time. So I'm walking around, and I'm doing, fine or whatever, and, browsing, and kind of, eat at the cafe. Like, I'm doing good. Like, I'm stable. I'm not crying. Like, like I was kind of Yoko Ono for a while, like ugly cry. Like, if you know, you know. So I get to the register, and this health food store is like blast from the past. Heritage, if you have ever been in Virginia Beach, Virginia, the Heritage Foundation, you know it. Everything in there is so, it's just a charm. It's been there forever. So anyway, I get to the register, and of course, the credit card machine will not work, right? And I can start to feel this emotion coming up, right? It's coming. And you know what? It came before she could figure out the actual credit card processor, right? And so the whole point of me bringing that up is, as you begin to reclaim your voice, right? So then it's like, again, Yoko Ono at the cash register. The reason that I want to kind of give you these stories, right, is because this is the process. Because if you have constantly self-abandoned, not given selflessly, if you have done that for years and years and years, as you start to unpeel and unpack those layers to truly uncover your authentic self, it's going to be rough. It's not going to be like roses and cups and teas, because you have to face two realities. You face yourself, right? And the sadness that you had to do that, right? And working through all of that, because it doesn't immediately get there. There's the anger, there's the, all the things of, all the emotions of grief, right? But then on the other side, right, it's like, what do I deal with this other dynamic, this person, place, situation, circumstance, or event? In this instance, it's a person, right? What do I do with this person's action or inaction? So you have to sift and sort. So it's and a lot of times with these types of relationships that we get into, they're so sticky. It's very difficult to kind of see what's mine and what's theirs. That's why I'm so grateful for my mom. She would always used to say, I'd come, you're as a teenager or whatever, you come home with some like boy thing or whatever, and I'm like, and she's like, what did you do? Like she has like no, like, no chill. She don't want to hear anything about how horrible they were. She's like, no, you focus on you, what your responsibility, right? And so, it's really funny because I really appreciate that now, because it taught me self-awareness and it taught me self-reflection at a very deep level, right? And I recognize that is a privilege at this point to have developed that, right? However, I want you to know that this is a journey that is accessible to anyone, right? So it just requires patience, it requires time, it requires a lot of emotion, right? And a lot of these emotions, a lot of people, like I know I did not deal with so many things because I couldn't. I was literally in survival mode from one thing to another, to another, to another. So I couldn't really, I couldn't really recover emotionally, right? And then there wasn't like an external force self-soothing, so it was all internal. So whatever ways and means that a person, again, we're conditioned, right? So however you find, your worth. So in my case with my mother was on some level my world apparently, but the thing is that with her and her being sick, it was like her illness became so much bigger than even her, and we've talked about this a lot. And so the thing is that we have these experiences, right, in our subconscious mind that are just housed there, and then it's actually creating our decision making into our future. So because I had not healed from my childhood stuff, a lot of that stuff, so much, right? And even my teenager and even my early adolescence, like I just took one pattern into another, into another, into another. And so by the time I looked up to kind of deconstruct this stuff, I look around and I'm going, oh my God, what a mess that I've made. So here's the good news. You can always change paths. You just have to decide when you're going to do it. So then it becomes complicated, because then you have to decide, right, what's theirs, what's yours, right, what you really want, what you really need, and the courage and the bravery to go out and do it. I told my patients for years that I would be eventually leaving the country. I would be eventually closing my physical practice. I knew it. I was like, I'm letting y'all know. And I did it years in advance, right? And every year it would get closer, and I would be, I'd leave the country and come back and leave and come back, and then eventually when I did it, they were like, oh my God, she was real about that, because as I continued to self-reflect and look at what I wanted, right, it didn't matter what other people needed anymore, right? Because the suffering was going to be there regardless. I could not be Operation Save-A-Ho for people. I just could not, at my own detriment.
And so what good is it if there's a lack of balance? Martyrdom is not not a thing. I mean, it's a thing, but it's not healthy. So there's no grandiose self-worth in martyrdom, right? And you're not modeling healthy behavior either. If you can't set healthy boundaries for yourself, if you can't, if your yeses are not yeses and your no's are not no's, right? How can you teach others? That's one of my huge pet peeves about people that work in the health and wellness whatever space. I've been in it so long, it wasn't even, we got laughed at. So whatever industry we're in now, the thing is that, we really have to do the work ourselves and be practitioners of this, because it's deeply nuanced and complex. This is not a 3 steps to changing your diet. This is not a, 5 steps to, geez, this is a lot going on, a lot. And so we really want to reflect, begin to observe our habitual emotions, our habitual thoughts. Why are we choosing this person, place, situation, circumstance, or event repeatedly? Why do I keep dating the same partner? They keep showing up in different forms, but it's the same stuff, right? Is it them or is it me, right? Is it both of us, right? Are we trauma bonded, okay? Because a lot of times we get into relationships and trauma bonds. And sometimes what we don't realize is deep emotional wounds that are in our subconscious mind, right, that we're not aware of, that happened in the past, are doing our choosing of our partners, because that part of ourselves emotionally, our inner child, has not been healed and it's wounded. And so it reaches out to itself for what it sees love is. So whatever that inner child that's broken or seemingly broken, whatever that reaches out to, people, places, situations, circumstance, or events, you're then going to repeatedly make those same choices. And that doesn't negate environment, right? So there's lots of layers to this. So we really want to reflect on situations. Again, I say daily, right? Because we're having situations and experiences on a daily basis. And so having a good practice, that's why we journal in the morning. I recommend journaling in the evening as well. I'll have that checklist hopefully by this weekend, right? That has everything kind of you want to do in a day, right? To kind of keep yourself organized, right? It's all about keeping yourself in a flow and keeping yourself in a rhythm, to keep your mind, your emotions, your body, and all of those things in check, right? And I like checklist formats because I don't have to think. I can just do it. Oh, and then what happens is I stop even needing the checklist because it just becomes part of my pattern, right? So I reflect on what I want to be different, right? Then I quantify that. So if I want to lose weight, right, what needs to be different? I need to eat better. I need to drink more water, right? I need to, if I want to build more strength in my body, more musculature, I need to do my TRX more, right? So I need to put that in my schedule and put that in my routine so I can check that off. And that begins to create a pattern, right? But what happens is when we try to put forth a new pattern, the brain wiring goes, nope, we like the old pattern better. The old pattern is so much more exciting, because our nervous system becomes addicted to these patterns. So that's why objectively I like to separate it out, where if you have a situation, circumstance, or event, even with a person, you separate out like what actually happened. They said this, you said that, they said this, you said that, etc. And then you write down separately the story you made up. So why, what this, I felt this, they felt this, all that stuff. Thank you, Anita. All of those aspects of it. Because when you start to write that down, you begin to separate out what is and what isn't. What your thoughts are, what your emotions are, based off of what objectively happened. Because our emotions, we can be highly reactive. And again, our nervous system gets involved. So we're running epinephrine, norepinephrine, our brain chemistry, our prefrontal cortex, depending on how much we're accessing our executive functioning, which is our ability to have conscious thought and conscious awareness when we feel an emotional response, an emotional reaction. So there's a lot to it, right? But the first step is just getting present to how you feel. And that's why meditation, that's why we do that morning flow, to really set the tone for your day, so that it starts to kind of calm things down and soothe things down. It's like, okay, I've set this intention for my day, and I've kind of made this container for myself. So now I've got a structure I can deal with. So now, all right, now that I've got that, and that's good. Now, what else do I want? Right? So now I want, I don't know, greater health, greater wealth, a better relationship, feel better with myself, whatever I want, right? I need to start to write down and become more connected with the patterns that are impeding, right? So if I want to work out, and when the alarm clock, and I want to work out in the morning and the alarm clock goes off and I roll over, that's not going to work, right? I'm going to have to get to what the thoughts or the emotions are that are driving me to roll over. Is it laziness? Is it frustration? Is it, it's cold outside for some of y'all, what is it? I remember in the wintertime working out, oh my gosh, 5 a.m. in the winter, no way. Get to the gym. So, I'm always thinking about my bikini body, right? So one of the ways that we can kind of, I don't know, we can start to get ahead of our mind, because we know our mind is busy. We know we can't trust half the thing it tells us. So our mind is not technically for storage, by the way. It's for quick decision making, but we'll get through that later. So we're going to start to create scripting, right? So that we already have like go-to things to say no, right? Oh, you know what? I really would like to, but I'm busy at that time, right? That's why I also love having a schedule too, because it's like, oh no, I don't have them on my schedule, right? And it's not that, I'm like, avoiding people, but it's like, this is to value my time. If you can't value my time and schedule something, right? Then I can't prepare for you. How do I know I even want to be around you, talk to you, etc.? Because sometimes I just don't want to people. So you want to come up with these kind of quick, I appreciate you asking, but, not interested or whatever. I get daily people reaching out to me about doing like SEO stuff, and I already know how to do all my SEO stuff. I don't need help with it. And so I've literally just got it to the point of not interested. Right? And then if they respond, because a lot of these people are super persistent, I just block them. Not interested. And then if they keep going, block. That's it. It's super easy. If I see something on TikTok that my nervous system is like, yeah, no, I scroll past it. If there's something like I don't like on a panel and I don't feel like it's healthy for me to join, or I don't feel like I'm going to add value, I don't join it, right? So there are these things that I've already established, right? You have to sift and sort and establish what works and what doesn't work for yourself, right? And that's where that's introspective and asking yourself those inner questions is so important. Even just asking yourself, what do I want? That's such a powerful thing. What do I want about my health? What do I want about my wealth? What do I want about my relationships? There's this life wheel that I teach my health coaches when I train with them, is that there's this life wheel that has all these areas of their life, right? And with all these areas of their life, we assess where they're at with everything, right? And so, are they happy in this area? Are they not happy in this area? And so we assess it numerically from a number of, 1 to 10. And so as we look back and reflect, we go, oh, okay, maybe these 3 areas are great, but maybe these 5 areas need work, and then let me prioritize this, right? Because again, this is about really organizing the chaos. Because the mind can be a very chaotic place with thoughts, with unprocessed emotions, with all kinds of stuff. When your mind is always racing like that, it means that you have unprocessed emotional trauma that you haven't dealt with. And the mind just can't keep up. It's just racing, 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 right? That's why I said the mind is a crazy place. Don't listen to anything it says. It's just delirious. So what we want to do instead is we want to sit, meditate, and be with our bodies, right? And really get honest with how we feel and process out the trauma out of our bodies. So I have I worked with a PhD researcher by the name of Dr. Thornton Streeter, and he does a lot of research studies on the human biofield, and he's done TED Talks and stuff like that. Anyway, so he developed a human biofield camera, and so I use it. And what's cool about the biofield camera and other bioenergetic equipment that I have is that it will, let's say a person's like, oh, I don't feel any emotions. Right? People are like, oh, I'm good. Everything's fine. This camera, right? Remember I was telling you about your chakras? It'll pick that up, right? But it'll also pick up where you're stuck and you're stagnant, because remember, emotions are energy. It's energy in motion, right? So we can see where that's stuck. So dis-ease, that's emotional suffering. Pathos, root word of pathology. Pathology is the study of disease. Pathos, root word, suffering. What if our disease is really just our internalized suffering and a manifestation, a physical manifestation of our internal suffering, of agreements that we've made with ourselves, past or present? So I've had the privilege of, being in family practice for so long and working with all, from the unborn to the taking their last breaths. And I will tell you that some of the most special cases I've had have been my end of life cases, because again, that level of vulnerability, and that, sometimes they would tell me things that they had not told anybody. I once had this case that, his family would go, what do you guys talk about? He just comes home and just cries, and he had lung cancer. So the lungs are grief, right? So there was deep grief that he experienced in relationship, right, with his partner who left him, right? And so there was deep grief and there was deep suffering. And he didn't have a space that he could communicate that in. So I created a space, right? And so that he could express that, right? And maybe on the physical level, he was also a smoker too, ironically, right? So, his lungs, they weren't coming back. And he wasn't doing all the whatever, he wasn't, because there wasn't going to be any, it was a terminal. So there wasn't, there was no end result. It was just, I guess for fun and games, I don't know, insurance billing, who knows, and so in those cases, it's really very tender, because those people almost have nothing to lose. Well, what if we lived every day like we had nothing to lose? Remember back when you were like 3, 4, 5 and you thought you could do and be anything? Like I remember, like I fondly reflect back almost in grief at this point because of how far we've come, right? And so even to this day, right, in watching everything that's going on, even having to continue to clear my subconscious mind out and not allow my mind to succumb to anything external. Again, people, places, situations, circumstances, and events, right? And so unless you are self-aware and you're self-examining, you're going to be what? Easily manipulated. In the marketing age, there are people that voted for Trump not because of any political reason other than the fact that they knew his name from marketing. They liked watching The Apprentice. What does that tell you? Right? So association, we have to train our brains, right? We can train our brains in anything that we want to do. I'm living proof of it. I couldn't sleep, like no sleep. Like what I was doing, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't sleep, right? No sleep, startled all the time because of my nervous system was so jacked, That was my daughter's favorite sport was, making me jump, right? And so, you know, oscillating through anxiety, anger, depression, victim cycles, all kinds of stuff, right? Bad relationships, failed relationships, dramas, traumas, like just so many different, stresses, pressures, all sorts of things, So I'm not suggesting that any of these aspects are easy, right? But when you begin to reclaim yourself and you begin to reclaim your voice, right? It almost becomes very freeing and very patterning, right? And so people aren't going to like what you have to say, and some people won't even respect you, right? And that's okay. Those aren't your people. And that's what we have to really begin to self-examine and go, is this what aligns with me, or is this not what aligns with me? And why am I choosing this? Is this truly because this is what I want, or is this something I've been conditioned into, something I've learned, something I've been taught, something I'm accepting because I want to belong, I want to be appreciated, I want to be loved? There's so many different reasons why we agree to certain things. And we must sit and reflect on why we're agreeing with certain things, mentally and emotionally. Because otherwise we're going to be anesthetized. We're just going to be fawned all over. Notice in the background I put what an actual fawn is. It's a little farm animal, right? So we need to start really getting into this habit of self-reflecting. And if it doesn't feel good, stop trying to force it, fix it, make it work. It won't work. Stop it. Stop it. Oh my gosh. Super old school. I know I told a lot of stories today, but it's just because this subject matter can be kind of on the deep side. And so it can really help when you realize like you're not alone. Everybody assumes that because you're a doctor, because you're this or that you have your life together. You don't. Like you don't, right? And I would say in a lot of ways, overachievers, right? They hyper focus on one area, one thing, one whatever, and then they neglect other areas, right? So, and I'm not saying every single one, right? But what I'm saying is like, try not to compare yourself to other people, right? And if you see someone that, let's say, has something or whatever, go, that's me in the future, right? Because that is going to show you what you want. So when I was kind of deciding, like 2 years before I actually met my husband, I kind of decided that I wanted to meet somebody, but only on like certain terms, right? And I'd come back from Peru and I did all this really deep healing. And so I just wrote, like, for probably about 3 weeks, just everything I wanted in a partner. And I just wrote it down and wrote it down and wrote it down and just got it out, right? Like, I allowed myself to just have that space and have that freedom to just script. And that's actually a practice, is scripting, right? So you don't just have to kind of go into it from a perspective of reflecting. You can also go into it from a perspective of imagination. So in this case, I scripted an imagination. So I'd say, okay, if I wanted to have a husband, how would I want to feel? Because the feeling to me was the most important thing. I really, at that point, I was like, I don't trust my mind. I trust my decision making, but it's only based off of my emotions, right? So I am not going to listen to this crazy thing, right? Because I had, dated all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all different, like the United Nations, like for real. Like I dated everybody. And so I really had to decide, and it was all very, I wouldn't say unconscious, but in some ways, yes, in the beginning, for sure. Just like, oh, you're here, I'm here, we like the same thing. Let's, not really examining core values. So this time, when I was writing, I was really speaking from my truth, my essence, how I want to feel, how I want to be treated, what mattered to me. And I spent about 3-4 weeks, and I wrote it, and then I put it aside, right? And I pretty much said, okay, go find this person, because we know that if it's on our heart, right, it's in the world, it exists, okay? So then literally like 2.5 years later, boom, that's when, this tall rostum, comes up to me in the Sulphur Springs, and then here we go. So you can do that with anything you want. look at an area of your life that you want to change, whether it's your health, whether it's your finances, whether it's your home life, whether it's your home, whatever you want, right? But make sure it's something very close to you and it's something tangible, right? And then you're just going to sit, and with no pressure, just a few minutes a day, right? I would just sit like in the morning, during my little journal time, right? I would just sit and jot down until it felt good, until it felt good to stop, right? And I was like, okay, yep, that's good for today. And then I close it and I, put it down, right? But I also do that for negative emotions too. In fact, I used to do different trainings for people, and one of the things I would teach people in these trainings was to have a what was it? It was a trash journal and a treasure journal, right? And your trash journal is all the trashy stuff that your mind says. It's like if somebody picked it up, they think like that you were like a psycho or something, like you were like, mine would have like, all these F-bombs that just, because people would tick me off, right? And I would be like, and I wouldn't want to like implode. So I'd go, let me get my free therapist and let me write it all down, right? And so again, it wasn't for me to go back and reconsume. It was just for me to have a place to stick my negative emotion, right? So that I wasn't projecting it out into the ethers and the world. I was actually being responsible with my emotions. Imagine that. And so the other thing too is my treasure journal was equally as important, if not more important, because that was really where I got to write the things that I want, right? All the things in all the great detail, right? That's what all the great philosophers have talked about in terms of manifestation and whatnot. It's all in your imagination, all of it. Everything that you want. But the problem is you're afraid to have it because of all the crazy stuff that your mind tells you. And so while you're trying to get your mind straight, you have to be a very mentally disciplined person to be in a group. That's why leadership and leadership training is so key, because it's important for you to know who you are in a group setting. Otherwise, you're just going to fawn right into the group. So taking that time, being alone, even in the middle of, my United Nations dating, I would take breaks to reflect and unpack and go, what happened in this relationship and what was my part there and what did I learn? And, and I spent adequate time. I wasn't, 2 months and back at it, right? And nothing against, but when you're in a relationship and you're relating with people, right? You want to reflect, otherwise you're just carrying the same madness into the next one and the next one. And hopefully the goal is that each one gets better and better and better, meaning healthier and healthier and healthier. It's getting more what you want, more what you want, more what you want. So another thing too with my journaling, right? So obviously if you've never had something before, like you have no idea what you really want, right? So I would look at different, like my friends' relationships. I'd say, like we'd go out to dinner or something like, I like when he does that. I'm gonna write that down. Or I'd see somebody, just on TV or whatever, and I'm like, I kind of like that. I want that experience, right? Let me write that down. Like it really doesn't have to be as difficult and as arduous as, you can choose to make anything fun and easy, right? But we really enjoy making things difficult. So let's start to reclaim our voice and change up what we're actually doing, right? Again, as we're learning this process, we want to notice when we're prioritizing other people over ourselves. And we know because we'll feel it in our physical body. Our physical body will be like, I don't want to do it, right? I feel it in my gut usually when I'm like, I don't want to do it, right? I'll have no energy, right? Somebody will be, they'll be like on a tussle panel or something, and they'll be like, oh, Dr. Steele, come up. Nope. Nope. Not interested, right? Because I know, like, I just don't, I don't have energy for shenanigans. I want to have productive intellectual conversation, right? And if it's not going to be productive, it's not going to be intellectual, it's not going to be stimulating in some sort of way. What's the point? What's the point, right? So practice saying no in ever so small ways, because that is going to start to rewire your brain into going, oh, okay, I said no, and nothing happened, all right, cool. I said no again, nothing happened, all right, cool. Because you have to consciously, right, be aware, right? Because again, unconsciously, your brain is wired that every time you step out of that box, something bad happens, right? So when you start to step out of that box, your nervous system's going to let you know. That's why you got to kind of tell you and your nervous system to calm down, chill. You got this, right? And this is where trusting self and having faith, certainty over logic, surrender. These practices are real and they're really important, right? Yeah, and if you don't practice them, right, this world can definitely swallow you whole. It's stressful. There's a lot of demands. There's a lot of pressure, right? You have to keep everything in one sock. And so we want to try to organize it best we can, especially because apparently our generation's been just dumped with just a mess upon messes. And so we're not going to necessarily fight anything out there, right? But if we start to come within and we start to work within ourselves, that's a totally different paradigm, right? So, and then there's a unity and a coming together because there's a connectivity. We are all connected. We are all one. We are a part of. So if more and more people start to wake up to who they really are and what they really want, we'll connect faster, right? People, places, situations, circumstances, and events will match as a response to you, right? So the work is not out there, it's in here. You don't like your out there, you have to go in there, right? And it's not your thoughts, it's your emotions. It was so amazing. I would have these almost, if you know anything about art, this like Jackson Pollock kind of, I would have these scenarios. I mean, I was in practice for a long time. And in the beginning, I didn't want to harm people, and I really wanted to master and learn my craft. And we had to do a lot of things manually in the beginning. Now everything is like automated, and it's like, well, but back in the day, we had to do everything, even lab reports by hand. It was a lot. And so, but what all of that taught me was patterns, right? So what I learned is I go, okay, people are coming in for physical problems, right? We're realizing their environment is not working for them, their home life, their personal life, their, work life, whatever, right? And even if their home life is good, maybe their work life isn't, or whatever, right? There's some dynamic, there's some trade-off going on. And then there's mental, in terms of mental conflicts, and there's emotional conflicts. But as we began to walk through those processes of physical, environmental, mental, emotional, as we begin to get to the emotional and we begin to really unpack those things, it began to open up their intuition, their ability to see, right? Things started to happen for them, right? They quit the job, they got a better job, they had a relationship, they improved their relationship, they made more money, etc. Because now the way that they saw themselves, right, their self-concept and their self-identity shifted. They were no longer just taking on other people's stories, they were creating their own story about themselves, right? One of the fun little things that I do, again, in the morning is when I say, when I meditate and stuff like that, I do I am statements, right? However I want to feel in the day, I'm confident, I'm self-assured, I'm peaceful, right? When I'm intending my day. Because I want to create my day ahead of time. I don't want to just live in happenstance. I don't want to just be, a victim to my day. I want to be a co-creator and a co-experience in my day. I want to be a part of my day. One of the things my mom would say to me that I love all the time, she says, make it a great day. And it really is, because we can choose that. Now, we can't choose our circumstances, okay? So good news, bad news. But we can choose how we view our circumstances. And so when we start talking into the subconscious mind next week, we'll talk more about kind of how the subconscious mind and the conscious mind begin to interact and agree. This week is all the primitive. This is all the survival, right? This is what we do to survive. So one of the things that I really said to my husband last year is, I'm tired of surviving. I'm tired. And I think many of us are tired of surviving, because many of us shouldn't be surviving, right? Why are we surviving, right? And so in whatever ways we are surviving, right? What if we shift that paradigm? within ourselves. That's the only option, because we can't do anything about a system. Good news, bad news. Can't do anything. The only other logical option, only other evidence to be true, is to go deeper into self. That's it. We go deeper into self. What's the worst that could happen? The world is still going to burn down. Literally. So, but at least we'll feel good about it, right? But I also think, too, that as we begin to set boundaries for ourselves, right, we begin to set boundaries with others. We begin to honor our own needs. We begin to respect ourselves. We start to snuff out more negativity, right? We start to understand. We start to acknowledge. We start to communicate. We're not living inauthentically. So many people are running around with masks on, showing other people what they want others to see. I don't think I have any shame left for that. So what you see is what you get, and what's interesting is people make up the craziest stories about you. Like, they will make up this whole thing in their head about you. Right? And it seems like the bigger, energy person, I don't know what you want to call it, right? But they will make up the craziest, like, what? I love it when people tell me how I feel, right? So I'm like relaxed, chill, whatever. Why are you being aggressive? Aggressive? What's aggressive? Right? And so part of that fawn response, right, that we would have is toning ourselves down. That's why I love, even though it's not my style to like cuss people out and stuff like that. I'm really sensitive to that. But, I don't begrudge other people to do that, because that's their self-expression. That's their voice. And truly, in the beginning, it was always super enlightening to me when, I would work with people and we'd finally get to this place where they would find their voice, right? And I would tell them, like, this is a new toy, right? You're not going to go out and play nicely in the beginning. Like, you're going to let some people have it, right? Like, I've let American Express have it. I've let, I've let Bank of America have it. I've let some people have it. I don't advocate for that. I don't, right? But, unfortunately, right? Unfortunately, it was the time, it was the space continuum. It just worked, right? And so, because it was me practicing finding my voice and saying, no, this is not acceptable anymore. This is not going to work anymore. A lot of times people will yell or they'll explode when they're not heard, right? So if you have a deep a core wound of not being seen or not being heard, when you start to kind of unplug that clog, so to speak, you're just going to kind of vomit on people for a little bit. I remember even, oh my gosh, this is so vulnerable. But I remember early on in my dating experience, I would literally tell my entire life story on a first date. I know those people are like, this lady is psycho. But I mean, it was because I just nobody heard me. I was a middle child. My mother was so unwell. There was all this chaos going on. And so my voice didn't matter. So it was finally somebody that, is captive to hear me. Those poor people. But really, I just want you to know that that's a part of the journey and a part of the process. That's why I have a video that says, be messy. We're human. I saw a video earlier, and I'll have to do a stitch about it, with the LA mayor, right? And she's just getting off the plane, and I can literally see her. She's in a freeze mode. Her nervous system is locked in. She can't even speak. They've got all the cameras in front of her, and you can tell she's not responsive. That's her nervous system. Her nervous system is in a freeze mode. And so, I get we want to hold people accountable and all that, but at a certain point we have to recognize that we're not robots. We're all human. We all actually, have feelings. I know the new term on the street is you're soft or whatever. But if we are not soft, what are we? We're hardened. If we're hardened, then what happens? We're narcissistic. We lack empathy. We lack connection. These are not things that build healthy communities and civilizations, right? These are more kind of totalitarian, sort of individual white supremacy sort of thinking, okay? So, having grace, having empathy, having understanding, man, living here in this country has taught me that indeed. Because it's not like the highly policed Americas where, it's like, like they tell you, when to breathe, when to this, when to that. It's very much a fluid, everybody's got to work with everybody kind of thing. And so I really got to deconstruct a lot from that, right? So we put ourselves in situations, circumstances, and events in order for us to be uncomfortable, right? But it's also for us to really challenge our mind and really challenge what we see as possible and challenge what we want and what we don't want. Every time I left the States, I didn't want to come back. Every time I would go and I'd work with, some other amazing healer in some, place, I was like, wow, I miss nature. I miss being connected with nature. I cannot do the suburban life anymore. I cannot do it. I just don't put me in the boxes, And so this kind of, really, I don't know, this really just lack of depth. That's not me, right? I'm a person who's deeply self-reflective. I've always been this way. Always, right? Even down to Aldous Huxley and the Doors of Perception, which maybe you guys know these people or maybe you don't, but it's this deep reflection of self and this meditation and really being centered and grounded and knowing and sifting and sorting. That's the only way you're going to get out of this fawn response. And it's not a one size fit all. It's not a 3 steps to this. It's not a 10 steps to that. It's not a take this. It's not a buy this. It's none of that. This is you and a pen and a paper and some honesty. That's what it is. It's courage. It's discipline, because it's not going to be a one and done thing. It's going to be an everyday thing. I had to do this stuff every day. I still do this every day. I have to. If I don't, I will be psycho. I mean, and there are varying degrees of psycho. Maybe unproductive is a form of psycho, And when I say psycho, I mean that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, right? Not being productive, not being loving, not being accepting, not being, and to myself, I'm not talking about other people, to myself, making sure I'm eating the right things, making sure I'm moving my body, because all of those things require mental discipline and mental effort. So if half of my brain is scattered because I'm running from my emotions, which is exhausting, by the way, I'm not going to have any energy to eat anything or even want to eat anything healthy or whatever. I'm going to go for what's easy, right? And a lot of times what people will do is they go for higher fat items, because fat gives this, the bonds in it, right? Give you this sense of satiety. So you feel, I feel comforted, I feel soothed, right? And so that's why people will go to food. And again, either you will communicate or you will shove food down, because you'll eat your emotions because you don't feel safe to actually feel them. And so we want to work on this so we can actually use our voice and begin to respond. But we first really have to get into what is their needs and what are my needs. And it can be simple. It's just pausing. Should I say yes or do, or am I overcommitting? Why am I offering? Maybe I should wait till they ask and then I can say yes or no. Right? I need to say I statements. It's about me, not my spouse, not my kids, not my this, not my that, not my boss, me. And we were working with some high-level professionals coming in that, like attorneys and stuff who worked in big firms. And, they were like getting phone calls 24/7. I said, wait a second, that's not healthy. That's not, well, I can't because I said, no. I said, no, watch. It's classical conditioning. You are making the choice. You are teaching them how to treat you. You're Johnny on the spot. You've set no boundaries. They don't own you. Hello. They have contracted a time. There are labor laws. Like, hello. You know? But it's that fear, right? It's instinctual, it's primitive. Oh, I've got to work so that I pay my bills and so they got us on the hook, right? So, what if we freed ourselves from that? What if we didn't care? What if we had faith and we knew that no matter what happened, we were always going to come out on top? What if we believed that life was going to work out for us? What if we believed that we were powerful manifestors and that we creators well beyond our years? What if we actually recognized our true power and our true worth and our true ability to create? What if we unified our body, our minds, and our spirits? Would we get healthier? Would our minds get healthier? Would our relationships get better? What would really happen? We don't know. We haven't tried. You have nothing to lose, right? So as you start to practice saying no, and you start small, I can't do this right now. I need time for myself. I'm going to think about this. I'll get back to you. What's one small boundary that you can start setting up? And you can think about it all weekend, right? Because we're definitely going to need to work on some boundaries next week as we start to get into sifting and sorting in the subconscious mind, because that's all your past experiences, perceptions of those experiences, beliefs, and core beliefs, right? And remember, just in case your mind's like, well, I don't really need to look anything, remember, you're short term, you're avoiding feeling uncomfortable. You're avoiding conflict. You're avoiding inner tension. Because really, it's just you and the journal. I mean, you could tell the truth. You could lie to it too, but what's the point? So it's really just you and a journal. That's the first step, right? I'm not saying that you need to do any actions. I'm just saying you start to actually get the stuff out of your brain instead of storing it. Because the file cabinets at this point, I think, are probably overflowing. So we need to, some file management here. Because long term, you're going to get burned out, you're going to get exhausted, you're going to not like people. I mean, I got to the point where I'm like, I hate people and I want people to die. And I know that sounds horrible. However, right, when you're a giver and you have no boundaries, right, you give, right? And then you get taken advantage of and you get, people don't value you, but you're creating your own drama because you're not saying no, and you're not, for me, I had to go, nope, not doing any of this no more. Why? Because I had these people pulling at me, I had these people pulling at me, I had everybody pulling at me from all different directions, and nobody seeing me as a human being. Everybody seeing me as some sort of checker or chess piece on a board. Yeah, we're not doing that. Because I know self-worth. So if I didn't know my self-identity, I didn't know my self-worth, and I didn't for years, right? And there was different parts of my identity, different parts of my worth. It wasn't, again, it's not this big bang. It doesn't happen like that, right? It's more of, oh, I have this awareness. I have this new awareness now. Oh, I'm making this new decision. I've identified this new pattern, right? It's like little birds at a time. It's not this, 1, 2, 3, popcorn style healing process. It doesn't work that way. But those long term, if we don't work this out, we'll continue to have these very transactional relationships that are very unbalanced. We'll continue to feeling burnout, frustrated. We're the ones that control the paradigm, right? We're the ones that say yes or no. And don't allow your bleeding heart to take over. You can't do that. You can, and it will cost you in the end. So really start to self-reflect. What are my long-term effects of me saying no when I really want to say, or me saying yes when I really want to say no? Is it worth it? Sometimes, right? Be honest, it may be worth it, right? There's this exchange, right? But you have to decide when enough is enough. You're the only one that controls those strings. Nobody else does. Now, other people, when you start to pull those strings back, people are going to respond because you've taught people how you are, right? So they've got to get adjusted to the new you. So recognize it's not just going to be one day, ta-da, there's going to be a process, so you're going to have to kind of repeat it. And just know that when you're retraining others on your new self, right, they're going to be reacting in all kinds of ways. They're going to try to, use fear, use intimidation, use fawn. They're going to go through their, it was so funny. I would see like 40-year-old, 50-year-old people throwing tantrums, in the middle of my office going, what is going on? So, but the reality is, when you start to set those boundaries, what happens? People that benefit from them start to show up. So you really want to know who somebody is? Start setting boundaries. You will learn quickly who they are, what they are, and if they are truly in your corner or not. Start using your voice. Sometimes you kind of already know, but sometimes you don't. So test it out, try it out. It's important. Because it manifests, again, these signs and symptoms. I know we kind of beat this over the head. We're just kind of wrapping up now. But when we have this chronic difficulty saying no, or we're over hyper apologizing, right? It's really because we've suppressed our own needs in order to make others happy. And so those types of behaviors really come from those deeper core wounds that we'll talk about next week, because we talk about, the unconscious. So we're going to talk about perception, how we create beliefs, core beliefs, and defense mechanisms. We may get a little bit to defense mechanisms so we can try to understand how those dynamics work. All right. Well, I am off on my weekends, so no working for me. But if you would love to come and join me and start the day on Monday morning, bright and early, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The replays for the weekend, you can go and listen to them over the weekend as well, replay them, and we'll be fresh, prepared in on Monday, and going in on that, and all next week for our holistic education, just like we kind of did. We did our first dry run this week. Thank you so much for everybody showing up. We've had a great week. I've had so much fun teaching with you guys. I really enjoy teaching, and I know just so much about the nuances of these various different things. And thank you for being so generous with my stories. They really are to help illustrate these experiences, right? And this has kind of been my style as a doctor. I've always really been very vulnerable and open with my world because, again, as a practitioner of this work, right, it's important for people to understand that they're not alone, right? And that at the very basic level, we're all humans, right? And you would be so amused, I think, to realize how while we may have lots of differences in many different ways, we also think very similarly and have similar needs, right? We all want to belong. We all want to be accepted. We all want to be a part of, right? It's just we have to decide, right, our worth and our value, because not everyone is for everyone. And so we have to really put our feet in the ground and 10 toes deep and go, hey, this is what's going to work for me. This is not what's not going to work for me, right? And so if we don't begin to determine and distinguish that, then we're just going to be in that fawn response. So thank you guys so much for joining me for the fawn response as we unpack that. I'm just going to recap what we've learned. All this week, we've learned about the primitive mind and its basic motivations of love or fear. We've talked about the previous responses of fight, which is either acting in aggression or depression kind of turned inwards. Flighting, which is escaping, avoiding. Freezing, which is stuck or overwhelmed. And each of these, again, is that survival mechanism. And then today, we just recapped and talked about the fawn response, which is deeply more motivated into prioritizing other people's needs, self-abandonment, codependency, empathy. I'm an empath. Those are actually all signs of fawn responses. It's a trauma response to be an empath. And so part of healing from that is bringing yourself back to self and starting to determine what you want and not being easily manipulated by other people's reactions, because other people, whether they like or don't like your response, your nervous system kind of can reflect on that. So thank you guys so much for attending. I will see you all. Have an amazing weekend. Enjoy, and I'll see you on Monday.